Hello there, you're very welcome along to this webinar on digital portfolios. I'm John Doherty and I'm with Patrick O'Shaughnessy here.
Good morning, John. In fact, it's just the afternoon where we are in the Kingdom of Bahrain. But if you're joining us from anywhere behind, more like GMT, good morning. And if you're joining us from the Far East, good afternoon, good evening. Apologies in advance, I was doing a little presentation on railways a couple of nights ago, hence the British Rail background. That's nothing to do with digital portfolios. Over to you, John.
So you're very welcome to this webinar. We're very excited to talk to you about digital portfolios. We're going to keep it very bright and breezy this morning / afternoon and give you a little bit of information about digital portfolios and some of the potential benefits of using them in your schools or educational organizations.
Let's just get a click here. There we go.
So just a little bit of an introduction to ourselves. My name is John Doherty. I'm a specialist in digital learning and innovation. I'm currently the virtual school lead here at St. Christopher's, and I have a passion for all things digital learning and how that can support authentic teaching and learning in the 21st century classroom.
So have a look. Mine nowhere near as interesting. If we can get to click, there we go. I'm the head of history at St. Christopher's School. I do lots of podcasting, primarily about history, but education stuff too. So enough about me. Let's have some more about today's digital portfolios.
So a little bit of an overview on our webinar, what we're going to cover. So we've kind of broke this down into 5 sections. So we're going to talk a little bit about what digital portfolios actually are themselves, the benefits and the potential benefits of digital portfolios and how you potentially can use them in your school as well. If you choose to bring digital portfolios into your educational institution, how you might implement that particular strategy. And then we're also going to talk about things to consider with a new initiative. All new initiatives are jam-packed into what is already a very busy school environment. So we're going to talk about some of the things and some of the learnings that we've had there, as well as some of the practical tips and next steps if digital portfolios is of interest to you and something you want to pursue in your school.
Absolutely. And if anything we say provokes questions or you want to interact with us, there's a Google form at the end that you can submit any and all queries, questions to us, and we'll endeavour to get back to you as soon as possible. So there we have it. Let's make a start.
Okay, so what exactly are digital portfolios? Well, there's quite a bit to them, but we've broken it into 3 distinct sections really. So really they give students an opportunity to document their achievements in school and also outside of school. So various things such as their interests, their hobbies, their personality, their academic achievement and progress as well. And it's a place essentially to record that in the internet, in the cloud, which replaces printed out CVs, the traditional kind of going with a physical portfolio essentially. But it also allows students to reflect upon the key milestones in their education, whether that's the end of their primary education at Key Stage 2, moving into Key Stage 3, or then on into their exam years, GCSE, A-level, IB, and so on and so forth. But all of these things are encompassed by creating essentially a positive digital footprint for the young people. So essentially putting themselves out there in a very positive way on the internet, not shying away essentially from using the internet because of some of obviously the inherent dangers of using some apps and some issues of the internet as well, and digital safety and so on. So we want to kind of foster essentially a positive digital footprint for our young people.
Yeah, and you're right to say there, John. Reflect. It's a key part of this whole digital portfolios process, because it is just that. It's a process, not an outcome. It's iterative and it's symbiotic. So there's going to be no end point with this necessarily. It's something that goes on and on and on. And you want students to take this with them beyond the confines of the curriculum and their core learning up to 16 or 18. This is essentially for life. So when we say learning for life or lifelong learners, that's ultimately where this is heading. So in terms of the benefits, I won't talk too long on this slide because we've got some slightly more detailed ones for each. So it's all about achievements and aspirations. So what have students done until that point? It's about documenting it, reflecting on it, that iterative process. And then their aspirations, what do they want to do next, considering what they've done where they're heading, their educational pathways, incorporating aspects from outside of school, developing technology skills, and that's critical. I'm sure we'll all agree on that. Whilst it's true, we can't say we're preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist, because we don't know, we can't see into the future. But what we do probably know is that having an up-to-date digital portfolio that enables you to develop your tech skills, it's going to be pretty crucial. I'm sure we'd all stake a wager on that. And then developing the whole child, this is more than just the academics. Academics is really, really, really important. It's pivotal to schools. Obviously, it's our, some would say, our raison d'etre, but we're also more than that too, right? And this initiative really encompasses just that. So, in terms of the achievements, this isn't binding. It may be that this doesn't work in your institution, or you want to mix it up, or you have better ideas. Just think of it as a starting point. What would we typically find in a digital portfolio? Well, probably an About Me page. Making sure it's appropriate, remembering the audience. Quite often on the internet, as John has rightly mentioned, you don't really know who the audience is. So an About Me page. Academic success, again, it's the linchpin of schools. So that's probably crucial. And then broadening beyond that into the domains of service, where you can really capture everything else and their passions and what they have done above and beyond the core curriculum. And then aspirations, again, absolutely not binding, but so folk can see a little bit more than just the certificates that they've accrued. Hobbies and interests, future pathways and careers. It may be that it's not careers, you know, our young people are entering, and one thing we can be certain about is they're entering an uncertain world. So that could be careers, vocational pathways, how they're seeking to develop and upskills. It doesn't necessarily have to be careers per se, but hopefully that's a catch-all term that helps encapsulate some of the things that we're looking at there. And then finally, global citizenship. How are they interacting with the world beyond their own existence? How are they making or seeking to make a positive contribution in their locality, their region, nation, internationally? Because one thing the internet does, it lets you talk to everyone pretty much everywhere. So having that in mind, I think is really, really important. Okay, so in terms of developing these technical skills, it's all about creating. Now, whilst we love our students using tech when it's purposeful and meaningful, which is great, we also want our students to create with tech as well. So as well as being consumers of tech, which is necessary, I guess that's what we're doing now to some extent, we want them to foster a love of creating too. And whilst obviously you can create outside of the domain of technical skills, that will probably be important to some extent in most vocational or career pathways. Being able to present, again, whilst we don't know the roles into which they'll enter, so we can't say for sure they're heading for jobs that don't yet exist, we can probably bet that presenting ideas, defending arguments, defending propositions, speaking to groups of people, either digitally like we are now or in person, post-COVID, that's going to be really, really important. And then evaluating, getting people's feedback, getting used to that, giving self-reflection. So that process where, you know, you've completed a presentation, but then, you know, you're reflecting what you've done, you're evaluating how can we make it better for next time, how can we improve that experience, sort of building that in. Because one thing we know about qualifications is they're sort of endpoint, right? They're like hitting the buffers. So it's understandable that that may not come naturally for students, but it will in the world of work. So stopping, reflecting, evaluating, and going again, right? So that hopefully encapsulates some of the developing technical skills. Developing the whole child, I know John would like to speak a little bit more about this, but I think that's really, really important, because when we talk about digital portfolios, if you, like me, are old enough to have a national record of achievement, the red folder, as far as I remember it, it was simply like a file of facts of just my certificate. So GCSE, A-level degree, master's. So it was like a sort of historical record charting my trajectory through education, a sort of endpoint. Whilst you could submit things that weren't necessarily academic, that was largely outside of its remit because it was a national record of achievement. So what we're looking at with digital portfolios is ways that we can capture and discuss and have that symbiotic, iterative process of dialogue with young people about what are they contributing, how are they going beyond academics, how are they leveraging what they've learned in a particular academic domain to make positive contributions, either to themselves, to others within their community. So that definitely is really, really important. It's more than just collecting certificates. Anything to add on that, John? So that's something
No, I think from a pastoral point of view, I think just having that balance between the academic side, and of course that's very, very important, as Patrick's already very rightly pointed out, but just having that balance between the academic and developing all those other aspects that we want our students to be. So that idea of, you know, our students developing into that whole child, someone's responsible, someone that's a global citizen, that's really, really important, and that can be showcased really, really well through the digital portfolio.
Absolutely, thanks, John. Coming to the end of my section, that's soon-ish, I think. Oh, we have, fantastic. Back to you, John.
Thank you very much, Patrick. So we're going to talk a little bit now about the idea of introducing digital portfolios in your school. So again, how do you go about that? And we're going to reflect a little bit on our own experience of doing just that here at St. Christopher's over the last couple of years. So when we reflect essentially on what we've done and also how we went about it, there were kind of three key things that we looked at. So we looked first of all at the intent, what we wanted to do and the positive difference we wanted to make here at the school. We then reflected on the implementation of how we were going to do that. And that, of course, is ongoing even now. And then the impact, again, measuring that impact sometimes can be quite tricky. So reflecting on the positive, hopefully positive impact the digital portfolios have had and will continue to have over the coming years on our young people. So first of all, the intent really, you have to ask yourself, what's your why? Why do you want to do digital portfolios, and how is this potentially going to benefit the students, of course, first and foremost, and the school as well? And how is that going to add value to what you already do? We had to reflect quite carefully, and I'm sure every other school is exactly the same, on some of the constraints that are in place. As we all know, schools are very busy places. There's lots going on. There's lots of new initiatives all of the time. And trying to embed a new initiative can be quite difficult, and there can be constraints in place, whether that's through curriculum time, whether that's just trying to get the technology on board, or making sure you have the infrastructure for various different other reasons. And then thinking about the system. So thinking about it systematically in terms of what you already have in place in terms of technology, what you already do, and how does this fit in? Does this fit into your essentially your pre-existing strategic intents for technology within the school? Does it add value to that as well? So really important to really think about the intent behind it if this is something you'd like to do within your school.
I mean, you're certainly right about constraints. Teachers, educationists, they are some of the most time poor people on the face of this earth, so they absolutely exist.
Absolutely. So once you've kind of got over that hurdle essentially of intent and thinking carefully about what you want to do and how you're going to do it, it's then thinking, right, how am I actually going to implement this? And with all initiatives, timescale is really, really important. Now, with something like digital portfolios, you certainly can't click your fingers and get it done overnight. It's not going to happen, but it is important to put fairly tight time constraints in place for yourself, just so that the initiative, whatever it might be, it doesn't lose that kind of emphasis within the school. So once it's launched, try and give yourself a reasonable time scale, an achievable time scale, but try and keep the potency of what you're trying to achieve high, I would say. That's something that we certainly learned over the last couple of years. Communication is also really important. How this is launched with students and how it's packaged to students is really key and really important, whether that's through formats such as assemblies, enrichments, PHAC lessons, tutor time, whatever you may have, and the different intricacies that exist within schools. That's really, really important. And of course, packaging that and communicating that with staff is also equally important, which brings me on to the last point on implementation, which is developing a team and getting essentially your cultural architects there, the people that are going to be the drivers on the ground, people that are going to be working on a daily basis with the students to ensure really that the digital portfolios are a success, they are of a high standard, and essentially they are meaningful for the students. So there are three things that we would really valued and we really reflected on for implementation, and we would have focused on as we were driving through this really exciting initiative. Anything to add there on implementation, Patrick?
Just to reiterate one of the things you already said, John. I mean, communication is important because you mentioned earlier, this initiative has no sort of buffers or endpoint. You want this sort of ongoing, so you're going to have to keep communicating this with staff and your student body and key stakeholders and the parents continuously. Now, it may be the sovereignty for deciding what goes in and how it's formulated sort of changes throughout the year groups and through time. But ultimately, the minute we stop communicating about this with our school stakeholders is the minute it starts to take priority Z. So yeah, absolutely, really important.
Thank you very much, Patrick. And then finally, then the impact. So of course, with any initiative, we want to try and measure that and essentially get an idea of how we've done and has this added value to the students' experiences at the school, the learning process of the students, but also the school in general as well. So I think very important to get some quick wins if you can. So early on, try and see the value of these portfolios. So for example, we were able to engineer the portfolios with one particular year group. At the time, it was year 9. We started the portfolios in September with that year group almost as a pilot. And the target was that they had basically a basic portfolio in place for Aspirations Day, which was in December. There, straight away, you can get essentially one year group very focused around this initiative. You can get them using the portfolios constructively throughout an event such as Aspirations Day, and you get that quick wins that the teachers and the students and the parents, of course, very important, can see the value of them early on. And then we were able to build from there. So getting those quick wins is really important. But of course, having a long-term plan for the portfolios is equally as important. So starting off, again, initiatives can hit the ground running. They can do very well initially. And then after a while, perhaps they can fizzle out. So having a long-term sustainable plan for your initiatives is key. Having something in place so that you have a short-term, medium-term and long-term plan, whether that's phasing it out with different year groups, whether that's adding to the portfolio. So maybe you start with a basic structure, and then you build around your school ethos a little bit more, and you get them to focus on sustainability, you get them to focus on service later on in the process, to tie all those things in together and make the portfolios a little bit more meaty, a little bit more to them, having that long-term that vision, and also things they can use it for as well. That's really important. And then finally, really focusing on positive operations. So within the school, within your enrichment program, within your pastoral time, are you able to utilize this portfolio at every opportunity that you have? So where tasks may have been done on paper, where tasks may have been done using a different platform, can you build that into using the portfolio? So the portfolio then essentially becomes kind of a supporting network for all things good that the students are doing within their time in school, but also their time outside of school as well. Anything to add on impact there, Patrick?
No, I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there, John.
Okay, over to you, Patrick, for the next section.
Thanks, John. So we're going to take a brief-ish look at things to consider when implementing this initiative. Well, I guess it's pretty general to all initiatives in school. So age and stage, investment into the project or initiative. It doesn't necessarily just mean cash, money and finance, but we'll include a bit of that. Sustainability, and then finally, friends, autonomy. So how are we going to move forward with this and ultimately segue students into taking autonomy and sovereignty over this initiative. Just try and move on. So here we go, age and stage. So to some extent, this is going to be sculpted by the sort of institution or institutions you're in. If you're in a mat or an all through school, you may want to roll this out sort of 3 to 18, or perhaps not 3, maybe 5 to 18. You're going to have to look at which ages you want to target first, because how the initiative is sculpted and framed is to a large extent going to be shaped by this, because obviously it's got to be age appropriate. Whilst you might want to do digital portfolios throughout your educational setting, the way that's going to be shaped and sculpted is going to look different at different stages. And you're going to need a coherent plan that sort of charts the chronology of what changes where do we up the ante, where do we add additional elements, depending on the sort of hands-on approach that you might want to or might not want to take. So that's really, really key. Success. I mean, in terms of charting student success, I mean, we want to make it clear to students that this is about them, this is for them, and it's ultimately going to have to be driven by them, and we want them to take it with them beyond school. This is the start of a process. It's definitely not the end. So this is a process, not an outcome. So it's getting them to think about what success looks like for them, for the stakeholders. And then it's evolutionary, as we've just mentioned. And how you plot this out throughout the schooling or educational experience, it's going to have to be evolutionary, because quite clearly what a digital portfolio looks like for a 5-year-old might be completely different than that which it looks like from your pre-U, IB, A-level, leaving cert students who are moving on at the age of 18. Anything you want to add to that there, John?
No, absolutely. I think that idea of the portfolios themselves being evolutionary is really, really important, because like every evolution, there will be certain things that we want to strip back that are less relevant, and it's how we do that, and it's how we package that. So for example, something we're going to talk about a little bit later on is the idea of using different modes at different key stages. So that might be a nice, neat way of doing it. But it's just getting into the idea of how that portfolio works, and even just having the time at key stage 2 versus the time at key stage 3 and 4 may look very, very different depending on the organization that you're in.
Absolutely. Sean? So investment, I mean, it's always important if we want to not just survive but thrive in any institution, education or otherwise. We need to be frank, honest, open, and plan for the investment that we're going to need to make into the initiative. That's not just digital portfolios, that's probably anything. Staffing in schools is usually one of the most expensive costs. So anything that you dedicate staff to is going to cost money. So it's important to look at the staffing here, but also if there's any packaging, and John's going to talk a little bit about that a bit later, but if there's anything that's going to cost, you need to be upfront about that, I would suggest, because money is often finite, often budgets are pinched. So just being honest and upfront about that from the get-go is usually pretty important if you want an initiative to be successful. At time, as John again quite rightly mentioned, time frame is always important. Again, it's important we're honest about those. How is it going to evolve? How is it going to change? Where are we going to find time for this to punctuate our day, our week, our term, our year, and the cyclical nature of school curricula, and as students move through school? I think that the key thing there is, I was reading, I think it was Tom Bennett's work on leadership for the Research Ed series, and pretty pithy quote that's always stayed with me, is that the morning briefing is the graveyard of many an initiative. You're going to need to be honest about how you're going to find the time for this, because as we know, curricula are loaded, they're full, staff are some of the most time poor people on the planet. So where genuinely are you going to find the time for it? What are you going to take out of the backpack so you can put this in, so to speak? So just being honest and frank about that from the get-go, and realizing it might have to change as you know, to be responsive to that. Training, not everybody may understand the background to two digital portfolios, or if you're procuring any particular sort of software, just be honest about what will staff and students need to know and be able to do, and skills will they need to have, and dispositions to essentially make this sustainable. And that may change as you go through, as you transition through different platforms potentially, but just being open and honest. I suppose that chimes with money. Training does cost money, even if it's free. It's going to cost you time. So thinking about that from the get-go, and as John has rightly mentioned, the planning, just making sure that it's cohesive, but is also responsive to changing circumstances as well. You could probably, John, though, say that about any initiative in any school,
absolutely,
anywhere.
Absolutely.
So sustainability, I think this sort of segues from the previous slide, but we want the project to grow. We want it to take on a life of its own. We want it to move forward and be evolutionary, as John again rightly mentioned. How are we going to build for that? How are we going to plan for that to make it sustainable? And we know if something changes very, very quickly, it's usually tech, right? So anything that involves tech, we need to be responsive to, or if possible, preemptive to changes that are going to take place. And that's systematic planning. Again, this could be any initiative in educational institutions under the sun, I guess, but the systematic planning, and how do we co-opt middle leaders? How do we co-opt parents? How do we co-opt students to make sure that we're inclusive of everyone within the school ecosystem, to make sure that everything is factored in? And again, this being responsive, that may have to change. You may have to be reactive at times, and that's fine. That doesn't negate us of our responsibility to undertake systematic planning if we're planning for success. So there we have it. Autonomy. Well, as we said at the very start, we want this to be something that students take beyond the classroom environment and the school environment. We want it to be nourished by things that the students do out of school. That's absolutely fine, and we absolutely champion and celebrate that. So we are going to need to, I suppose, have frank discussions amongst staff teams, with students, and with key stakeholders about how we plan for autonomy and shifting sovereignty of the project to students through time. Because if we want students to bring in the co-curricular activities, hobbies outside of school, things that they do with parents and carers, there's going to be a degree of independence, and not just what goes in to nourish the digital portfolio, about that, how it's frameworked. And I don't want to step on John's toes too much about the sort of nitty-gritty, which John will touch on, but this is going to have to be discussed, because different institutions are going to, I guess, want to do it in different ways. How rigid do you want this to be in terms of how it should look, how it's formulated, what goes in it? Because I guess, generally speaking, you're going to want to shift from a very sort of school-managed model to an independent model, because ultimately, once the student leaves at age 18, we want them to carry on this iterative symbiotic process. We want to build on it, and they won't have us there or the school there to do that for them. So it's about brokering that, really, and just being honest. Anything there, John, you'd like to add?
No, I think as you said quite rightly, Patrick, we're going to touch on this in a little bit more detail in the next section, but it's that idea essentially of giving them some structure and some scaffolding, but also having that autonomy and that independence, so their portfolios do look different and they reflect them, the individual, as well. And that's really, really key.
Absolutely. Is this you, John?
It is.
All right. Thank you. You can have a break from me for now.
So we're going to talk a little bit now about practical next steps and some advice just based on our own experience. So there's three kind of key areas really that we're going to focus on. So the first one is the platform choice itself. What that platform choice might look like may be very dependent on the resources you have available. Support materials that you can put in place quite easily, and support materials that you might want to create. And then the visibility of these portfolios, and looking a little bit about how public you want this information about the students to be. So the first thing really is to focus on this idea of platform choice. Now, we've kind of broken this into three different sections. We're going to focus a little bit more on school domain in just a second. So we are very much a Google school. So we use all of the different Google apps. So for us, using Google Sites is kind of a no-brainer really to build these portfolios, and it works really, really well with our internal system. But of course, there is autonomy there. You can use other website generators such as Wix. Wix is very, very powerful, very easy to use. And some students, as they become more proficient with their portfolios, we've experienced have stepped away from using Google Sites because of various different restrictions with it, or just they find Wix a cleaner platform to use. And then finally, then using social media to harness this. And now we've used the example here of LinkedIn, but there's other social media platforms and apps that could be used. Of course, LinkedIn is, you have to be 16 or over to use it. So that would be one predominantly that we would promote with our older students, so those in the sixth form. And they found that as a really good way of kind of harnessing different achievements. As we know, as educators that are on LinkedIn, and we've advertised this particular webinar through LinkedIn, we know it's a powerful app. And if you do a course, for example, an online course, you can link that into your LinkedIn profile. So there's a huge advantage, particularly for the older students, with something like that. So to talk a little bit about maybe the school domain in a little bit more detail, some of the advantages I've highlighted here would be, first and foremost, it's relatively easy and inexpensive. So if you already have, or you already are using Google Apps for Education, then you're going to get Google Sites for free as part of that. So that's already going to be built in. And your students, if they have essentially a Google-friendly website that's already built into your domain, you can harness that and they can go off and they can create their websites. So that's a huge advantage there. Something like Google Sites and Google Slides, which I'm going to talk about in a second, they are relatively straightforward. They're very much drag and drop, quite straightforward. So in terms of student training, it's relatively kind of minimalistic in terms of the technicalities of using it. And then within something like Google, you can differentiate quite easily. So you have the option to use Google Slides, maybe for your Key Stage 2 students, if you're an all-through school, and then maybe Sites at Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4, where you're adding that a little bit more professionalism to it and a bit more technicality to it for the older students. So I just want to give you a little example now of what this might look like. So this is just a mock-up of maybe what a portfolio might look like as you enter the home page. So you've got the digital portfolio homepage, and then you can create sub-pages off that as well. So you might have, the student might have an About Me page. They may have some special interests that they want to share, making them very visual, so dragging and drop videos and photographs in there creates that kind of diary feel that you want from the portfolio. Of course, things that are particularly pertinent here at our school are things like service and sustainability. So they might want to have their own sections on those, as well as overall academic achievements as well, and other achievements, hobbies, that they do. Maybe they're part of a sports team and they've done very well there. I think one of the key things really that comes across with the Google Sites platform is really that it can be very, very easily quite visual. So you go on there and it has that diary feel to it. Students can add their own photographs, their own video content very, very easily, and it has quite a friendly feel to it from the get-go, really. Just want to skip on. Oh, there we go. So just a little bit of an idea about some of the support materials that we've put in place. So these are just essentially just some screenshots from some of our resources for this initiative that we provided students, but also teachers as well. So we've looked at things like evolving your own portfolio, tips for your CV, 5 steps to success. So just a couple of examples there. But one thing that I really want to stress, and one thing that I've particularly found quite useful, and I know I've had some positive feedback from students and from teachers as well, is creating your own video content. So we tend to do that again through YouTube because it integrates really, really well with Google. So create your own video, your short little videos, sort of maybe 5 to 7 minute videos. Some of them can be technical, so they can focus on different aspects of how to use the platform, whether that's Google Sites or Wix or whatever the case may be. So talking through how to use color schemes, how to create pages, all of those things. And then you might want to create some resources which focus on the content side of things. So what is good content? How do you lay it out? How do you structure your pages in such a way that when people are viewing the portfolio, that they are user friendly, they do make sense. So when somebody, for example, like a head of year wants to look at a portfolio from the point of view of maybe writing a reference, as that student's moving on to the next phase of their education, they can quite easily click on your portfolio link, and all the information is laid out in a clear and coherent way. And then you might want to think a little bit about visibility as well. So visibility is really, really important just from a safeguarding point of view as a school institution as well. So one of the ways we've been able to harness this, and you can see my creative list of ex-Man United football players on this. So all these guys have excellent digital portfolios of all of their achievements, not just sporting, but otherwise. But the way in which we get that information quite easily is we show the students how to share an appropriate link. So make sure within our own context that anybody within the school domain can view the link of their website. They fill in a simple Google form, and then we're able to capture all of the links in one place. And it means then that you can filter by form class, you can filter by name, etc. And you can click on the links, and it makes it very easily for you to be able to access that, but also keeping it in one place. So if somebody in the group is not quite engaging with it, you can find out why. You can go back to your team of tutors or those cultural architects that I mentioned earlier and find out maybe a reason why there isn't as much on a particular section, for example. So you can get some very, very good analytics from just a simple Google form. That works really, really well. You might want to build in this review time in something like tutor time. So again, especially with, we tend to find that our younger students in the secondary school, their tutor time is very busy. There's lots going on. But as they move up through the school, there's more flexibility in terms of activities on a daily basis. So you might want to factor it in maybe weekly or every couple of weeks where they just spend a little bit of time with their tutor reviewing these portfolios, and that can be very, very useful indeed. Okay, so I'm going to hand you back over to Patrick for the very last section. Thank you, Patrick.
Thank you, John. Awesome. All right. Well, as you see on the screen, I'll leave that up for 30 seconds or two. If you scan that with your device, there's a short Google form to fill in. Essentially, you can give us your feedback, and we will more than happily send you the resources from this session in a Google Drive link. So if you want the presentation, if you want any of the stuff that John's been talking about gratis, just scan that. It'll take you to a Google form, or at least it should take you to a Google form. And yeah, we'll get those straight over to you. So there you have it. If you are scrambling around for a device and you are, through gritted teeth saying, I wish this guy would give us a bit more time, do not worry. Both John and I will put it on our Twitter and LinkedIn feed, so you can give that a scan. And yeah, make sure you get the resources. We'll happily send them over to you, and you can use them as you see fit. So anything I've missed there, John?
No, absolutely. Thanks very much for that summary, Patrick. That's absolutely brilliant. And I just want to personally thank everybody for attending today. And we'll, as I said, we'll be able to send over the video resources and the slides from today's session. And feel free to get in touch via LinkedIn or via Twitter, like Patrick's already alluded to. We'd be very happy to work with individuals that might be looking to, go down the pathway of digital portfolios, or indeed educational institutions or schools. If this is something you want a little bit more work with and you'd like a little bit more CPD specific to your institution, please do reach out. We'd be more than happy to support you there.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you very much indeed for giving up a sizable chunk of your Saturday. I mean, our weekend here in Bahrain is drawing into its tail end, but hopefully yours is just getting going, or if you're in UAE, you're slap bang in the middle of it. So look, we really, really appreciate everything you've done, and thank you for all you've been doing in your schools for a very, very long academic year, and we hope that you have a fantastic summer. If there's anything we can ever do for you in terms of CPD, just let us know.
Thank you very much.
Over and out.
Take care.